Chapter 2. Viral Revelations. Zithusula 123 entered Dr. Zhikatika's office with his hands stacked full of boxes. As he came to a stop, inertia sent one of them tumbling from the top of the pile. The doctor, who had just entered reception to greet the young Jihari scientist, barely managed to catch the falling box before it hit the floor.
Hey, careful now, you might want to just set that load down before anything gets broken. Over there in the corner will be perfectly fine.
Sorry, completely my own fault. I knew I should have made 2 trips, but some things, well, you know how it is, I just never learn.
No problems at all, my impatient young Jihari. No damage was done. So anyway, my understanding is that you are here to perform a complete system-wide overhaul, is that correct?
It certainly is. From top to bottom, your entire system will now be fully orchestrated by a proprietary new artificial intelligence core, which will have full integration to the Nest's central network. Believe me, you will hardly know yourself, Doctor. From simple patient bookings to highly specialized patient diagnosis and everything in between, this new package will be able to handle it all.
Well, that all sounds very exciting. Still, I can't quite help but wonder.
The doctor hesitated briefly, an unreadable expression forming across his face.
I know this is going to sound very silly, but I'm going to ask anyway. Will my services as a doctor still actually be needed once you get this new miracle system of yours up and running? At least if it is half as clever as I've been led to believe it is.
Zithusula's 9 eyes all went wide with surprise upon realizing the source of the doctor's apparent anxiety.
Oh, my good doctor, you have nothing at all to worry about, believe me. No, there will be no early retirement for you, I'm afraid to say. At least, not due to this new upgrade anyway.
Zhikatika sat the box he was carrying on top of the large pile that Zithusula had just stacked into the corner.
Well, that's certainly very kind of you to say, but still, time will tell, no doubt.
Zithusula, who had just started busying himself opening up one of the packages, lifted his eyes to meet Zhikatika's gaze.
No, seriously though, Doctor, I actually do know what I'm talking about here. Your role as a medical professional could not be more secure. The truth is, this AI is absolutely brilliant, right up until the moment it isn't. To suggest otherwise is nothing more than the all-too-typical Nest-sponsored propaganda. Now don't get me wrong, the advancements we have been making in wideband deep learning have been truly remarkable, but to claim this is any sort of replacement for arachnid intuition is just plain nonsense. My professional advice is that you simply treat it as a useful assistant that never gets tired, and one that can aid you in double-checking your own work. The bottom line is, I wouldn't trust it to treat an injured digit if unattended, as you might suddenly wake up from sedation, only to find your entire limb has been hacked off. Not that I think it would really do that, you understand, but, well, I think you know what I'm trying to say.
Zhikatika smiled benignly at the young Jihari scientist's touchingly sincere attempt at reassurance.
Well, no doubt I will still find ways to keep myself busy. And I must confess, the Queen has thoroughly briefed me on your particular field of expertise, so I know all too well that you know exactly what you are talking about.
The doctor paused briefly before quickly adding,
Now, if I may be so bold, your reputation does rather precede you, so it would be negligent of me not to at least ask. You might want to seriously consider switching your medical records over to my office. As I'm sure you are already well aware, I specialize in Jihari patients, and even the Queen is counted among my clients as per the long-held tradition of the Zhikatika line. I can assure you, Zithusula, that you would be in very safe hands with or without this fancy new AI.
Zithusula smiled uncomfortably at the doctor's generous offer. Well, this was more than just a little bit awkward. It wasn't as if he could tell him that the very idea of being treated by a Yimatiri doctor who served only the Jihari elite literally turned his stomach. But he couldn't simply run roughshod over his own deeply held principles the moment they became inconvenient either. The problem was, there was just something that he found strangely likable about this doctor, in spite of his better judgment. Zhikatika, in a display of empathic intuition that would make a hive mother proud, quickly picked up on the unease being exhibited by the young Jihari scientist and swiftly moved to diffuse the situation.
But that's a conversation for another day, and far be it for me to steal patience from my peers. So please just know that if your circumstances ever change, my services will always be here for you. And of course, you can perhaps let the Queen know that I at least made the offer, yes?
Zithusula felt a mild flush of relief at being let off the hook so easily. Certainly, Zhikatika could have made things a lot harder than that. Clearly, then, this offer was just something the Queen had bullied him into, and her reasons for getting them together had likely been nothing more than a contrived and manipulative stratagem to get him onto the doctor's exclusive list of clientele.
I'll have a good think about it, Dr. Shikatika, and get back to you just as soon as I've made up my mind, I promise.
Zethusela said smoothly, knowing full well that was a bold-faced lie.
I'm sure you will. So anyway, is there anything else I can do to help you out with all of this gear?
The doctor gestured quizzically towards the large pile of boxes, stacked haphazardly in the corner.
Engineering and technology are just a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, I'm afraid to say. But I'm more than happy to be a trifecta of helping hands if you should happen to need them.
The doctor held his 3 forelimbs out in front of him, palms facing up, while wiggling all 27 digits mischievously.
Well, as long as it's not going to keep you from any of your patients, you might want to point me towards your central operations console, and then make a start on unboxing some of this kit. I admit there is rather a lot of work to be done, but I'm more than confident that everything will go smoothly and with minimal downtime. Not to trivialize the complexity of this upgrade, but the truth of the matter is I did small installations just like this all the time, back when I was still only a student.
With a mildly bemused nod of acquiescence, the doctor signaled for Zethusela to follow, as he headed towards the primary systems and operations theater.
Well, it certainly sounds like you know what you are doing then, and I can well imagine that the Queen would have accepted nothing less than the very best talent for this particular upgrade. Now, before I forget to ask, do you need me to release the master security lock?
I appreciate the offer, but no. Believe it or not, I actually have Nest-wide Level 2 global access.
Zethusela replied a little awkwardly, sounding mildly embarrassed by the admission.
Really? Level 2? Well, I guess the Queen must think very highly of you then, in spite of your alleged differences. Not that it's any of my business, of course. But anyway, I'll leave you to it, and make a start on that mountain of boxes of yours. I won't break a thing, I promise.
Zethusela gave the doctor an ingratiating smile.
I'm sure you won't, not with those surgeon's hands of yours anyway. But seriously, only if you have nothing more important to attend to. Like I said, I'd really hate to keep you away from your patients.
Nonsense. I've already rescheduled all my bookings for today, as I anticipated that there would inevitably be at least some level of outage and disruption. Better to be safe than sorry, as I often try to remind myself, typically only after it's already too late.
The young scientist nodded appreciatively.
Well, I have to admit, that was probably very wise of you. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can get certain subsystems back up and online quickly enough, if you happen to really need them, but it's going to make my life a whole lot easier if I can do this setup methodically and in a set order.
Please methodologize to your heart's content. Just so long as you get everything back up and online before the day is out, I'll be more than happy. But I've taken up enough of your time already, and apparently I have a small mountain of boxes still waiting to be unpacked, so please don't hesitate to yell out if you need anything at all.
Zethusela called out to the back of the retreating doctor.
If you could start by unpacking the boxes labeled non-volatile quantum optical storage, that would be greatly appreciated.
Without looking back, the doctor silently waved an acknowledging hand in the air. The scientist, now all alone, turned his attention to the central operations terminal and was somewhat bemused to find that it was several generations out of date. It was even too old to have a biometric scanner, so he powered up the holographic interface and entered in his credentials manually. Zethusela then proceeded to open up a series of bidirectional transfer ports to every core database on the system. These, he planned to link up and copy over to the new upgraded optical storage units once they were all up and online. However, one of the ports steadfastly failed to initialize. He tried several times with an increasing sense of frustration, but it terminated with what looked like an obscure security violation on every attempt. How odd, the scientist thought to himself with a mild sense of bemusement. This looked like a completely isolated encrypted firewall that required its own custom authorization in order to gain access to. Now, why in Zikadia would Dr. Shikatika need to have anything remotely like that embedded into what was otherwise a fully integrated system? Zethusela reflexively slapped himself in the face when the rather obvious thought suddenly occurred to him that this was almost certainly where the Queen's private medical records were being held. It seemed almost painfully apparent now that he had actually taken the time to think about it. After all, an embarrassing royal health problem made public and released to the planet-wide newscasts would no doubt very quickly find itself irretrievably jetting its way across the extrasolar networks as it took the long journey towards one of the 4 outer colonies, so that they could then be suitably titillated and scandalized by news that would admittedly already be many cycles out of date by the time they received it. Well, at the very least, Such a leak might cause some potential loss of reputation or unnecessary humiliation, both in real time right here on Cicadia and in the years to come on the satellite worlds. Either way, it was a headache that Zitalia would no doubt much rather not have to deal with. And after all, she wasn't exactly the most popular queen on Cicadia, even when allowing for the natural competition that stubbornly continued to persist between most of the elder Xylectials. There was nothing else to be done then. He would simply have to raise the issue with Zikatika, who could be instructed to authorize a secure encrypted tunnel between the old and new database. Zethusela sighed wearily. All of this extra hassle, just so they could prove to any royal audit that the Queen's medical history was never at any risk of public exposure, even if only for a handful of seconds. The young scientist was just about to return to the front desk in order to raise the issue with the good doctor when something made him pause. This was a singularly unique opportunity to secure a clandestine and potentially useful bargaining chip for the future, should he, Zicadia forbid, ever actually need it. The truth of the matter was that there was likely nothing of any real value on her records, but it certainly didn't hurt to take a peek, just in case. And given his friction with the Queen in particular, and Zicadian society in general, then really this was an opportunity that he was justifiably obliged to exploit, purely as a form of insurance. With only the very mildest sense of shame, he proceeded to reconfigure the failed port to a pending state, and then spoofed it to 2 forwarding addresses, one of which was awaiting assignment pending the doctor's advisement, and the other, secretly bound to an external proxy tied directly to one of his own remote servers. That done, he then headed back to reception to find the doctor in order to explain the problem.
No, not at all, my young lord. There is absolutely nothing for you to apologize for. Truth be told, I actually respect your willingness to safeguard the Queen's privacy, especially given the, shall we say, complicated relationship that the two of you clearly enjoy. Now, all I'm trying to say here is that I would not necessarily have taken your stance on this matter for granted, and to be frank, I rather think that it says something very positive about your character, as apparently you have not chosen to exploit this opportunity for want of a better expression.
The doctor placed a reassuring hand onto the back of Zethusela's thorax, handed him a stack of the unpacked optical devices, and then started to guide him back towards the primary operations theater.
Now then, Zethusela, I do hope you are able to appreciate that things might not go so well for me, nor you too for that matter, if a data breach was ever traced back to this office. So since these new optical devices of yours are now all unboxed and ready to be racked, what say we get them up and running without further delay, so that I can authorize that encrypted private link? After that, my quixotic young Jihari, we can get the Queen's medical records copied across safe and sound, which I'm rather certain will leave both of us breathing a whole lot easier.
Zethusela, scuttling alongside the doctor, nodded enthusiastically.
I couldn't agree more, Dr. Zikatika. The sooner we get this thing tidied away, the better. Speaking of which, forgive my presumption, but I've taken the liberty to pre-configure a data port that is all set up and ready to go. All you need to do is secure and authorize the link-up between the old and new database. The copy itself will take only a few microseconds, and then I can get on with the rest of the installation, knowing this potential security threat has been safely put behind us.
Simply outstanding.
The doctor responded exuberantly.
You know, I hope you don't mind me saying so, but I see a genuinely bright future for you, Zethusela. All you need to do is learn that most deceptively difficult of lessons, that discretion, more often than not, is the better part of valor. If you can do that, who knows what doors might yet open up before you. So please, my young Zihari scientist, lead the way.
When Zethusela at last left the doctor's office some several hours later, Zikatika felt more than certain that he would only ever make use of a tiny fraction of the new features now available to him. Yet even that would still represent a rather traumatic level of change to the rhythm of his obsessively compulsive daily routine. The problem was, Zethusela was still much too young to understand that once you reached a certain age, then change, even change that was supposed to make your life better, was not always something one welcomed through the front door. Unfortunately, though, in this particular case anyway, it was an unavoidable consequence of a much more important objective, and as such, was a hardship that simply had to be endured. One of the very first things the doctor did, now that the scientist had finally left, was to shut down a large proportion of the high-level cognition capabilities associated with the new Central Artificial Intelligence Unit, most of which Zethusela had just finished proudly demonstrating. With that done, he wasted no time in disabling most of its autonomous machine learning capabilities. This, at least, made the doctor feel a good deal more comfortable, as he could then very cautiously add a few small features back in, one at a time, if and when he decided they might actually be useful, and more to the point, safe to use. Finally, and with a not inconsiderable amount of trepidation, he opened up the shadow cache that he had secretly attached to every base port on the network, including, of course, the secure port Zethusela had used to transfer the Queen's medical records to the new database. He was not overly surprised, but still more than a little bit relieved to see that the hidden metadata provided incontrovertible evidence that the Queen's private records had been double-cloned, not just to the new optical database, but also to an unknown and unauthorized external proxy outside of his own local firewall. Well, it was certainly rather gratifying to discover that he had not been mistaken about the young scientist's moral compass. Had Zethusela not tried to steal the Queen's medical history, then he was probably not quite the Shihari that he had supposed him to be. In an odd sort of way, then, it seemed that they both shared in common the heavy burden of their own names. It was, after all, the Zethusela lineage that created the first generation of Shibots, which had been used to devastating effect in a number of key military campaigns. As such, the Zethusela line, strictly reserved for 5-brained Shiharis and above, had been funneled down the technological career path ever since. Very clearly, this did not sit at all well with Zethusela 123, as he was essentially an aberration amongst even the most modern of Shihari. In other words, a liberal conservationist. There was not a doubt in Sikatika's mind that were it not for this 7-brained Shihari's obvious brilliance, the Queen would have disposed of him long ago. So, all things considered then, he rather suspected that once the Shihari scientist examined the Queen's private files and learnt about the truly ancient viral sample, taken from none other than Zitalia's own mother, the elder queen of legend, Gianna, Zethusela may well find himself having a sudden change of heart about becoming one of the doctor's registered Shihari patients. The remarkable fact of the matter was, Sikatika, almost by blind luck, had made a truly shocking discovery with regards to the viral sample, which for thousands of years had steadfastly refused to reveal any of its deeply hidden secrets, much to the Queen's considerable displeasure. However, although it was supposedly his solemn duty to do so, he had not the slightest inclination to share what he had learnt with the Queen herself. His ancient ancestral namesake may well have been an easily corruptible and gullible sellout, but that certainly didn't mean he was made of the same low moral fiber, even if he had fooled the Queen into believing otherwise. The tragically unpalatable truth was that by Zakatika's own estimation, Queen Zitalia was a dangerous and volatile psychopath. If it should turn out that the virus could in fact be used outside of its natural mechanics, then she was the last arachnid in the whole of Zikadia who should ever be allowed to exploit it. Zethusela, on the other hand, represented a singularly unique opportunity. Given the incredible nature of what he had just discovered about the virus, an expert in quantum technology made the young scientist the perfect fit as a clandestine research partner. The doctor transferred the incriminating contents of the hidden cache to a portable storage crystal, evidence of Zethusela's treachery, to be kept in his back pocket, just in case it should turn out that he had misjudged this Shihari after all. Still, it was an insurance policy he sincerely hoped he would never need to claim on, and unless his instincts had badly led him astray, he seriously doubted it would ever be needed. But time, as they say, would tell.